Ever since the Lumiere brothers brought us film in 1895, we've been infatuated with the moving picture and its ability to tell stories. Though if the moving picture is the ultimate form of visual storytelling, then at the true heart of cinema is cinematography. What is cinematography? In its definition, cinematography is the way in which the camera is used to communicate meaning through the composition of visual elements. This is made up of framing, angles, and camera motion. An on-set DP, director of photography, would also determine everything in the scene from lighting, colour, and depth of field. It is this compositional art form that helps translate empathy in visual storytelling. Without it, the communication of narrative would not be the same. The three-time Academy Award-winning cinematographer Conrad Hall said that cinematography is infinite in its possibilities, much more than music or language. From the perspective of the audience, a shot can take on a whole new meaning of its own. They have the remarkable ability to have infinite possibilities, summoning new theories and conclusions from each viewing. If a picture speaks 1,000 words, then how many does the moving picture speak? In this day and age, we are all more attuned to cinematography through the use of social media platforms. From Instagram to Snapchat, every day about us realizing we are thinking of the composition of visual elements, doing so to best present our perspective. Unconsciously, we acknowledge the framing, angle, camera motion, and lighting of our subject. We are seemingly more attuned to the process of storytelling through the use of cinematography than we know. We have the Lumiere brothers to thank for film. Though in its novice beginnings, the moving picture was considered a fad. It took a while for film to come into its own, to move past the static recording of a stage play and start experimenting. Thankfully, we had over 100 years of experimentation to iron out the kinks. VR, virtual reality, is headset-mounted screens combining realistic images, sounds, and other sensations that simulate the user's physical presence in a virtual reality. At this moment in time, it covers the fields of gaming, documentary, and filmmaking. Though like early film, we have not fully begun to understand its potential. In some cases, VR is being used in the same style in which the Lumiere brothers filmed stage plays. Here, I talked to award-winning artist Deepa Mankler on her experiences creating Retney, an immersive educational VR experience.
You know, we're at the early days of this. It's like when the cinema camera was invented and people had access to filming, and the first thing they did was they put the camera on a tripod and they plonked it in front of a theatre stage. So things kind of kept going as were. It then took them a little while to realize they could move the camera around. And I think that's kind of where we're at with VR. We haven't gotten our heads around its full capability and potential still. VR is being used in a really generic way. I think if you're creating animated, immersive experiences in VR, that's really different to 360. And there are different tricks you can use. And I guess Retney, one of the interesting things about Retney is that it's not a pure game. It kind of blurs those boundaries between education, gaming, experience. And I'm kind of quite proud of that blurring of lines because content tends to be either in one genre or the other, especially with animated VR. I think 80% of the content is gaming. We did use tricks to signpost people along the journey, and it was interesting that the user experience in terms of journey time varied enormously. For some people it could take up to half an hour, for others they were through it in seconds, but that's very much part of the experience in terms of people getting lost and absorbed in the surroundings, because it is so mind-blowing when you're in VR for the first time and so all-consuming. So I guess you do need a focus to a point, but part of it as well is to have that flexibility. I think it depends what you're doing. If it's a music-focused experience, then it's kind of okay to look around and to be in that. You don't necessarily need to have that one point of focus. If you're telling a story in 360, then yeah, obviously it matters a lot more. It just kind of depends on what you're trying to do.
You didn't feel like your narrative had to have a cinematography in mind then?
I would have wanted to explore that in the next project a lot more, but no, I don't think it's completely necessary. And I mean, we're beginning to explore what's possible in kind of animation and VR, and I think we've only just begun to scratch the surface on that. You know, there will be new styles emerging perhaps that we don't even have names for yet. I guess what's missing is the opportunities to explore that, because it's such an expensive medium to work in. If I was to do it again, I would have a completely different approach.
How would you approach it?
I would have the concept and the story much more tightly pinned down. I would have a really clear idea in terms of how I want the user to feel, what I want them to see, how the full range of the experience, what I want that to be, and the key kind of takeaway for them in terms of the story that's being told. It's just a totally different way of approaching it, I think, rather than the way that I did. And also I would spend a lot more time on the storyboarding in terms of visuals as well. I just didn't have the luxury of any of that in terms of time, because we have this crazy deadline for South by Southwest.
Here is Werner Herzog, one of the masters of cinema, being asked about VR.
What do you think is going to happen to filmmaking with all this technology coming to it? Something like VR, how is that going to change the way we interact with documentary film and experience?
It won't, because VR is not an extension of documentary filmmaking, nor is it an extension of, let's say, 3D action movies, nor is it an extension of video games. It is a tool that is completely new and separate from all the kind of instruments and genres that we have developed. So I do not believe it's going to change documentary filmmaking. We still are filmmakers. We still are creators. We still, or at least I do, articulate opinions. I stylize. I really cast the most fascinating characters.
With VR, we have a new realm of space to play with. To try and strong-arm our understanding of film into a new medium might not work. To direct the user to a cinematic frame inside this space, we might have to step back to the fundamentals of audience direction. Here is an interview with Fiona McLaughlin talking about how her and her team developed their VR short, Portrait of an Artist.
We followed like a really basic set of questions. Okay, how can we explore this in a way that makes sense to us as animators, but also makes sense to a user or a person who's going to view it? So we put ourselves in the shoes of like an audience in a theater section. So like if we go to the theater, if you're right up close, you're nearly inside the production, right? You barely even see that there's a stage sometimes, and everything dissolves away and you become a part of the performance. And the more you can break down that there is no stage or there is no frame, like some films captivate you in ways that you forget that you're looking through this tiny little box, and theatre done well does the same thing, and you forget that you're in a seat in a theatre performance. So we were like, okay, well, how do people in theatre tackle this challenge when you have a stage and an audience? And we really tried to get that immersion through thinking about space, or like a gallery space. How do we feel when we go through a gallery and look at paintings or sculptures or things like that? And it kind of worked because the topic was on a painter, so it made sense for us to look at galleries to begin with, but I think it really helped in thinking about space rather than frame, like within a box. So yeah, we just began prototyping. It was very early on, and we didn't really know how to begin visualizing it or making prototypes or doing storyboards, like how do you do storyboards for VR. And so we looked at 360 video and how, you know, when you see on YouTube it's like 360, but you're seeing everything at once, and it's like you take the 360 camera and you sprawl it out. So that's how we did our storyboards. Yeah, we imagined that the frame was spread out, like you peel apart a sphere and you lay it out long ways, and that's how you get your timing and your audio and everything together. But you really gotta use bits from different practices and stitch it together in a way that's kind of new. Now, we did this before Oculus brought out their storytelling design principles. So they had prototyped how to make storyboards after we had done that ourselves. So it was a very different approach, and like probably just as good, you know, if we had done that first. But obviously it was so new at the time, there was so much documentation that wasn't even made yet. So we just had to like pick things from different places to figure out how to do the same kind of animation production, but really use a different set of tools.
Well, there was two aspects of it. We wanted it to be really genuine and real. So set creation, as in what it was going to be like, was our plan, and what we ended up doing was flying over to Thiepval in France, where it happened, and found some trenches that people there had kind of recreated as authentically as they could in the place the trenches were originally. So we used a technique called photogrammetry, which is basically taking hundreds of photographs, potentially thousands of photographs of an area, and then you use a piece of software to stitch them all together, and it creates a kind of 3D representation of what is in real life. So from a set point of view, what we wanted it to be genuine and real, so we scanned it. From a cinematography point of view, of finding what we wanted people to look at, I'd say we would approach it. What's slightly different is if any film stuff I've been on, whether it's visual effects or shoots, the DOP will come into the space on a recce and they'll look around and they'll say what looks good, and then they'll think about shots from different angles and where the light falls, and basically try to frame something that they think will work really well. With the VR, we knew that yes, the user looks around and they get the freedom to do that, but as a creative, you kind of have to create those frames in and around it. So you think, okay, right, you come round this corner, you know the person's going to look down here, you want to draw their eye to the right, and then you want to create a frame or create part of a set that gives a certain feel or makes it kind of really look atmospheric or say a certain thing. From a cinematography point of view, like a DOP, we'd create a set in a way that we wanted. We wanted it to be genuine and real, so we scanned it, and then we found elements in it that we thought were really beautiful or worked in a way that said a certain thing emotionally, and then we basically created those elements and placed them in areas that would draw your attention to them, so that it would look like it was naturally there, but essentially you had constructed that and you made a kind of part of the set. Maybe the light fell across people, and when you passed them and they were on your right hand side, when you look at it, it would be framed like the way you would look at something in film. Watching people use the experience, and a lot of VR experiences, people, they'd look around and they kind of explore the place when you initially put them in it, but then after a few minutes you can notice that they generally, unless, like for example, an explosion goes off to the right hand side, they basically follow the path, and they kind of almost have a very constrained field of view. They don't constantly, in my opinion, and what we kind of experience, they constantly look behind them or around them. They still sort of face forward. So in something like Ghost of Thiepval, where we had a path, then we knew generally there was a high percentage that somebody's going to be looking in this direction. So we bring them down and across the trench, and then we lay out the stuff in the trench in a way that we think is aesthetically pleasing, and light it in a way that we think has got the most impact. And then from there we'd turn a corner and we'd do the same thing. So it would be building the world like that, but we knew for a certain percentage people would look in a particular direction, and we try and encourage them to look in that direction as well. Beyond Arrive is slightly different because it's a game, and it had some game mechanics and some elements to that experience that were very different to Ghost of Thiepval. Ghost of Thiepval was potentially more passive, so you're on a path and you're going through and you're telling a story, and we noticed that a lot of the experience still came through the audio, came through the narration and what people were saying, and that's what the story was about. It was basically taking you through that experience of being in a trench, and that's what drove us to choose an environment like Thiepval and go over there and scan the actual trenches so that there would be an authenticity to the aesthetic to match the authenticity of the audio that you were listening to, which was essentially recordings of people who had been in trenches and had survived, and the kind of horrors and the post-traumatic stress that came with it. So they worked well together. Beyond Horiath was slightly different because you were we approached that from the point of view that we wanted to create a VR sort of version of old classic games that we liked. So Star Fox was this one in particular. We wanted to create this sort of VR space that you were kind of constrained on a path again, but this time you had a ship to think about and move about and enemies to dodge and a kind of objectives that you would get in a game. So they do differ slightly because then the elements that are passing that you have to hit become something you have to think about as well as just the narrative. I wouldn't say lost. I think it's a different kind of challenge. The difference is that yes, it's a frameless medium in the sense that the audience can kind of look around, but like cinema, there's things like the golden mean and places you put things in shots to draw your attention to them, or frame it in such a way that some object is more, or person is more dominant than the other person. There's like a grammar to that kind of edit and way of constructing a shot. And yes, this is a frameless medium, but at the same time you're just drawing that person's eye towards something and allowing them to frame it, because you still have a peripheral vision that's kind of blurred from like 180, 220 sort of thing. So you're for example with sound, setting an explosion off there, they turn around and then there's a moment for you to frame that in a way that is similar to the way you would in traditional cinematography. But what that means is, and the reason it's more challenging, is that as that narrative's building, then you have to think, okay, well, do we want to go from this place here to another place, or do we want to carry on towards that thing that we framed before? So yes, it is frameless and you can look around, but I think like cinema, there's ways of drawing attention to certain areas and set designing in a way that you create shapes and compositions that again may look organic, but they're completely constructed, and they're constructed in a way to complement the narrative. For example, Ghost of Thiepval, you might want to bring somebody down into a trench and have a lot of bodies around you as you pass through it, when you want that person to feel claustrophobic and part of the story to feel tense and difficult. And that would be the same in traditional cinematography, where you might want to bring somebody and do the same. You've got part of a narrative that says you want them to feel claustrophobic and tense and surrounded by people, so you bring it in tighter shots, bring a lot of people around, just lower depth of field. Like there's techniques you could use to amplify that person's experience. So yes, it is frameless, but at the same time you can constrain the user, the player, whatever you want to call it. To me, it's a different medium. It's kind of like looking at a painting and saying, could a film be a painting? And it's like, I think VR is a completely different medium and it has a different language. And I think what people are doing at the moment is understanding what that language is and how to manipulate somebody's emotions within that VR space. And you can see that even with the language and kind of world that you have within like the games industry. It's like different than cinema in that sense. You've got that interactive element, you have that way of like making decisions, or it's not passive in the way that cinema is, and that industry has matured, and there is rules to it, and there's a language and there's a grammar to its own kind of like games experience. I think VR is a separate thing again, because yes, it is more immersive in the sense that you can look around and you can be in a space and believe you're in a space, but the medium itself, the people that work in that need to find out what's the most effective way of, or what's the most engaging way to take somebody on a journey. So I don't think it will replace feature film. I think it's another medium that will sit alongside feature film and may have some elements that are similar. There are aspects of what makes somebody, in my opinion, you can, for example, we have a HBO project and there's a DOP on it called Yarmir, and I think he's like a world-class DOP, and he's absolutely fantastic at finding beautiful frames. And in my opinion, he understands how light falls on something, he understands the distance between objects, and is able, within whatever frame, 16 by 9 or whatever, he can find an image that says a certain thing that as a director you want him to find. And within VR, there is some aspects that are the same talent, the same skill, because the person is trying to find a shape, trying to find a structure that makes sense and complements that emotion or that part of the story or the narrative. Some of those elements can transfer across. Some of those, I think, are completely new and are a new medium, and then you'll find a whole new subset of people that find that medium and space a better place to express themselves and find beautiful shapes and images and lights and whatever. So yeah, some skills are transferable, but it's a new medium.
No matter the medium, our base motivation is to communicate emotion to our audience. The true immersion of VR is the creation of worlds. Books allow us to imagine it, films allow us to see it, but VR is the first medium that allows us to experience it. Though to move beyond the novelty of virtual environments, I believe cinematography is key. Seemingly we're stepping back to move forward. We're discovering roots of visual communication, with the creation of worlds for the audience to explore. The mood board, what we want to use it to feel in certain times along the journey, are as important as the storyboard. Yes, the medium is immersive, but this could bring about a new dawn of truly visual, cinematic immersive storytelling. It is the first time we somewhat physically enter and explore the world of the creator. I believe cinematography will play a key aspect in the future of VR, though as VR evolves, so will cinematography. It's hard to predict these outcomes, though is this the final true innovation of immersive cinematic frame?